Between all the events since the attack of 11 September of 2001, the most benefited country was China. In a simple manner, the main outcomes of China's in its various spheres, geopolitically and economically, and, intriguingly, how the COVID-19 recession can be favoring China in the long term. If you wish to know more about how the world is evolving, subscribe to the channel and leave the like in the video. 1. How everything started. Erased from popular memory and residing only in historical records, there is the fact that China was, in the Middle Ages, a dominant culture in Asia, a time when the most valued products were spices such as clove and cinnamon from China, with the same roads connecting the West and East being rebuilt today in China's attempt to restore the superpower it once was. In fact, China has anticipated in centuries the European technologies of the Middle Ages that have enabled the great phase of European expansion in the Americas. Some examples of these technologies and also everyday products are paper currency, gunpowder, bells, ink menus, parachutes, fireworks, toilet paper, and macaroni. So, why did China literally miss one of the greatest opportunities in history of becoming the global superpower of the time? When the Ming Dynasty came to power, it adopted a policy of self-isolation, underestimating the great European navigations as trivialities, which is explained by China's view of territorial and technological inferiority of the West, intensified at the wrong opportunity, leading to the refusal to maintain relationships with other countries and dismantling the shipbuilding industry, seen as irrelevant by the new rulers, also wasting the skills of experienced commanders, the most famous being Zheng He, who commanded a vast fleet long before the great navigations and even made expeditions to the African coast. 2. From Tordesilhas to the Second World War. So, how the US became the global superpower it is today? After World War II, the US, unaffected by bombings, experienced incredible economic growth, rebuilding entire countries in Europe with the Marshall Plan. Cold War. In the Cold War, it occurred that the only countries that had not reached their full potential were Russia and the United States, with China dealing with internal political conflicts and failing to keep up with the technological innovations of other countries. The current United States. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States, having already expanded capitalism across the globe, adopted the stance of maintaining free market policies and individual freedom with gigantic armed forces scattered on military bases around the world and possible involvement in some conflicts such as the Gulf War. The actual China. How China plans to surpass the United States. The so-called Chinese Dream have its origins in the political conflicts that occurred before the consolidation of the PCC, the Chinese Communist Party. With the socialist initiatives of Mao Zedong failing and causing big troubles to the Chinese population, one man, Deng Xiaoping, stood out with his economic opening policies that originated current Chinese economic and political strategies. The government of Deng Xiaoping took advantage of the vast cheap Chinese labor, transforming China into the factory of the world with tax incentives and the so-called ZEEs, exclusive economic zones, basically provinces focused on economic development but without leaving aside the socialism of Mao Zedong, which gave rise to the so-called socialism with Chinese characteristics and the Chinese dream, antagonists of the American dream. Here there's a description of the Chinese dream according to the actual Chinese leader Xi Jinping. We must make persistent efforts, move forward with incredible will, continue to propel the great cause of socialism with Chinese characteristics, and strive to achieve the Chinese dream of great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. The economic reascension of China continued until COVID-19 came, and precisely because it originated in China, the government's severe containment measures prevented an economic outage and in some way helped China in the short term, allowing more easily the imposition of severe measures to constrify the population, facilitating the consolidation of Xi Jinping control in the PCC, and the approval of laws that, in other situations, would be much more controversial and passed on in the media. And also in the long run, with the cooling of tensions with Western countries, these Western countries worrying much more about the unstoppable growth of inflation, lack of medical supplies manufactured mostly in China, and support of armaments and ammunition to Ukraine, a conflict in which everyone bet a lot and which I have already made a full video on the channel about how it developed. In short, the small downturn caused by the pandemic in the Chinese economic ended up favoring them by possibilitating the remediation of tensions with the Western countries, maneuvers of political domination of Xi Jinping in the PCC, and stabilization of the immense global economical initiatives, all facilitated by the greater control of the government over the population obtained with the measures of lockdown. 4. The future of the world: China versus US. To estimate the probability of success of China in becoming a world superpower, let's review its geopolitics and economical situation relative to other powers. With Russia struggling to maintain the Ukraine invasion and its political integrity, Europe dealing with separatist movements, anti-migration issues, and managing to find the internal balance in the European Union, the unique country that remains stable and can project its influence overseas is the United States, even facing inflation challenges and political instabilities. Knowing this, it's possible to predict the relation between the two countries by generical factors over time and the possible overall fluctuations in the global economy. Government: China is more than ever politically consolidated by the almost total control of the PCC core, relying on Xi Jinping, considered the most influential leader since Mao Zedong, and recently approving laws to remain permanently at power. United States: America is facing serious conflicts since the election of Donald Trump in 2017, but these don't give signal of ceasing. Armed forces: China is continuously elevating its military budget, but corner rivalize with the enormous gigantism of those of US for still many decades. In the armed forces of the United States, no explanation is needed. They have the world's largest military industry and nobody can compete with them. Possibility of conflict: a conflict between the two nations is improbable, being better to China mature its emerging technological and industrial poles before thinking in an open conflict. So, if China is funding the world's biggest economic initiatives ever, how can the US react and how the world will face in this situation? The truth is that there isn't much to be done, seeing that global economy is already dependent on China, who will have some more time to develop its expansionist pretensions until the normalization of the Ukraine war in Europe. Chinese overview. Speaking of China, it is probably the unique nation which can be used the term of re-emergent superpower. The history of China changed the world three different ways between the mysterious ashes of history. It was the more advanced nations of the West and the world. Its decline seemed to facilitate the best way to the development and prosperity globalization has caused. Now, China patronized the largest economic initiatives on the world, shaping a new global market to his own image, outlined by the Chinese dream. Can China make another fallback? Such scenario isn't necessarily the end of humanity as it may seem today, and may happen by the imbalance of the factors that have given China the power it has today, its large population and excessive government control. This possibility justifies itself due to the crescent restrictions imposed by Beijing against the most promising changing world markets, artificial intelligence and cryptocurrencies. Past some decades, Beijing coerced itself without hesitation to the contradictory laws of monopolizing space travel markets, AI uses, and prohibiting cryptocurrencies. Final question. Who will win, China or United States? After comprehending the many factors in the global relations, especially between China and the United States, the future of the world is much more clearly. Here is it. The tensions of this new Cold War will probably consist mostly in Africa and Asia. Africa. African nations, which can become centers of global production if the initiatives of economic development and reduction of violence and economic risk promoted by virtually all nations are successful. Due to the debt trap China has implemented in Africa, can be mentioned that France or even Brazil could rivalize the China influence on Africa. Asia could be of interest of the United States, support the Asian tigers and other powerhouses to limit the overseas Chinese and, by last, can be argued the paper of Russia in these tensions. The most likely is that Russia ally with China, all through which caveats not to become just the supplier of natural resources to the growing Chinese demands, likely scenario as the problems of territorial administration and permanence in the power of Vladimir Putin increase more and more. It's notable that, even without the house in order, Russia masterfully uses the emerging trend of private armies possessing the largest in the world, the Wagner Group, active in the war of Ukraine and also in Africa, which could be another hindrance to the West, significantly influencing African nations, which can become centers of global production if economic development initiatives and reduction of violence and economic risk promoted by practically all nations are successful. Again, if you like the content, subscribe to the channel and leave the like in the video to receive more content like this.